Hello everyone, welcome to the course Disability Studies in India, Historical, Social and Cultural Perspective, right? As in this module, we are talking about Indian literature and disability. So in this lecture, I'm going to talk about disability studies and the social model in contemporary literature. Social model and in contemporary literature. So before I talk about this discourse, before I discuss this, let me discuss what we were talking about in the previous lecture. In the previous lecture, I was talking that how literature has misrepresented people with disabilities. And it is our job to question those narratives. Until and unless we question those narratives and reshape our literature, these prejudices, these biases will keep coming up and people will keep internalizing it because we read literature, right? This is how our minds are shaped because many of us cannot question the dominant narratives, all right? So let me give you an example. In the Western literature, if you see, right, in the Western literature, if you see, Jews are always projected negatively. Jews are always projected negatively. They are always projected as a greedy people, as if they are not moral. They only need money, nothing else, right? We can start from the Shakespeare. Look, I will just give you two examples and then you by yourself can understand and relate what I'm talking about. There is a play called The Merchant of Venice. I'm sure that you all have read it. Look at the character of Shylock. How Shylock is projected. He is a villain. He is represented as a villain. And all the qualities, that is prejudice qualities of Jews are attributed to that character, right? He doesn't care about human emotions. He doesn't care about feelings. He doesn't believe in any friendship and all that. He just wants money, whatever the cost one is ready to pay, he doesn't care. Right? And as the story proceeds, you see that Bassanio has borrowed the money. One is ready to pay, he doesn't care. Right? And as the story proceeds, you see that Bassanio has borrowed the money and then he is not able to pay. The case goes to the court and he is ready to take the flesh of Antonio, who was on bet, and he is ready to take this. Shylock is ready to take the flesh of the human body, right? And he is not ready to, like Portia is constantly looking for mercy, so on and so forth, but he is not ready and not ready to listen anything. Having said this, right? You see how Shylock is represented here as a villain. There is another important novel that we have, Oliver Twist. I am sure that you all have read it. In that novel, Fagin is a character who is also a Jew and he is also projected as a villain. So I am not saying that other people are not projected as a villain. But what I am saying that a one character from a one particular religion, if he is there, if he is given that, if he is given that role, that characteristics, will belong as if he is a villain. It's only villainous character. I don't see any Jews projected positively in the Western literature. Why is it so? Think about it. Does that mean all the Jews are bad? Right? It's because Christian morality does not accept the practice of Jews. So therefore, they are always vilified in the literature. And you see, in fact, I say that the treatment that they received in World War, being a victim of Jews, to certain extent, literature is also responsible. Because literature continued believing in this and perpetuated these prejudices. In fact, during the World War, there are many literature produced that vilified Jews. The images that you notice, the paintings, the pictures, the narratives, the statement about Jews, which led people believe that Jews are threat to the society. And it resulted in. Same case is with people with disabilities. There are many reasons which we can say that they were disabled people were blamed for this. But they are dependent, they are deficient. There are literature produced which popularized those prejudices against people with disabilities. And that is why they faced certain violence. You got this idea? So, our job is to question those narratives. Our job is to challenge those narratives. And talk about the lived experiences of people with disability to counter that. And hardly I see till 19th, 20th century, people with disabilities are writing about people with disabilities. In fact, even people without disabilities are not writing about people with disabilities, but they are just giving somewhere a role that is also for humor, for villain, for letting the plot move, right, so that they can enhance the plot. Right, or comic relief has such sort of just making fun of those bodies. All right. So think about this. Now, as I have already mentioned that medical model and social model, they keep coming in our imagination, they keep coming in our discussion. So medical model dominated even today narratives. For them, right? For them, for the society, disabled people are burden. It's an individual problem, and that is what even projected in literature as well. But social model to a certain extent question that. It does not say that body is problematic, it says that society is problematic. So that we also see that attitude is reflected in literature, that you can see, okay, this narrative is being governed from medical model, this narrative is governed with social model. That you can easily notice that when you read that. So let's look at the first slide now. So when we come to the first slide, what we find here is contemporary literature has increasingly influenced by the field of disability studies, which encourages a shift from seeing disability as a personal understanding it through the social model. The social model posits that disability is not simply a result of physical or mental differences, but is largely shaped by societal barriers, lack of accessibility, and stigmatization. This shift has led writers to focus on the experiences of individuals as they navigate these external challenges rather than solely talking about their physical or mental conditions. You got it? So I'm not saying that you are not supposed to talk about the mental and physical conditions of people with disabilities. I'm nowhere suggesting that you should not represent the mental and physical conditions. But what about talking about how people with disability also navigate their everyday lives? What is their encounter? What are the external challenges that they face? But to talk about this, you have to bring changes in your perspective itself, because you are more committed. You are more committed for people with disabilities to talk about people with disabilities in literature. That's the first thing is required. And second thing is also required, that they will not be just a minor character serving the purpose of letting the plot work. Alright? So these are the certain problems that we have. These are the important concern that we have. So until and unless we challenge these two ways, like where one, they are not just a vehicle for the plot, and second, they should be given due weightage in the narrative function. Let the story flow to see what the disabled character has to say about the life. How does he look at the life around? How does he look at other people? How does he look at the society, or she looks at the society? Then only we can have a different experience. Then only we can have a different way to look at society. Alright? So this is what I have been talking about, that this is why disability in literature becomes one of the important area to know more about disability. And this attempt, like pushing this boundary, pushing this barriers, where people with disabilities are just a vehicle, disability studies has done a lot of contribution, taken a lot of steps in this. I would say that if disability activists, disability studies had not emerged, it would have not been possible. So due credit we should give to disability studies, which made us to look at the story differently, look at the character differently, look at the relations of people with disability to disabled character differently. Otherwise, we were also prejudiced with certain idea, and that used to help narrative to progress. We didn't find anything unsettling when we are reading narratives and when it is projecting people with disability as a negative character. We find that's fine, that's okay, there's nothing wrong with it. It goes on and on. Alright, let's look at the slide please now. So when we come to the slide, what we see, for example, we have Mark Haddon's The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. The protagonist, Christopher Boone, is suggested to be an autism spectrum. So I'm just picked up one example where one of my research scholars is doing research on Mark Haddon's The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. So the protagonist, Christopher Boone, is suggested to be an autism spectrum. And the novel is written from Christopher's perspective, capturing his sensory processing, logic-driven mindset, and struggles with social interaction. Haddon avoids reducing Christopher's character to a diagnosis, right, which was case before. First time we see that he has not reduced the main character just to a diagnosis. Instead, creating a narrative that centers his agency, intelligence, and complexity. So by focusing on the structural challenges, right, by focusing on the structural challenges Christoffel faces, right, head-on highlight how social attitude and misunderstanding affect his life, thereby aligning with the principle of the social model. What we see here in the curious incident of the dog in the night time, that's the first time, not first time, is in this novel, we see the protagonist, the story is not just about diagnosis, but it's more about autonomy, it's more about agency, it's more about the challenges that he faces in navigating the life. You're getting my point? The challenges that he faces in navigating the life. There are a number of texts produced which talks about disability only as if they are meant to visit doctors, they are meant to talk to doctors, there should be caregivers, and they are more about their personal life and all that. But it's not about what they think about the society, how do they interact with the society, how do we live our life, right? What are the challenges, the barriers they encounter, agency, autonomy? It's not discussed in literature, right? So we need more text like the curious incident of the dog in the night time to be published, to be written by the author, to be read by public. Because also true that public doesn't show interest in reading novels which are based on disability characters or disabled characters. So these are the challenges that people encounter. All right, let's look at the next slide. The most transformative development in contemporary literature has been the emergence of disabled writers who bring authenticity, depth, and nuance to the depiction of disability. So writer like Alice Wong, who edited Disability Visibility first-person stories from 20th century, I would say that please read this book, right? Disability Visibility first-person stories from 21st century. And autistic authors such as Helen Kong and Naoki Higashida provide the first-hand accounts of living with disability, offering insights that go beyond stereotypes. Their work presents a range of experience and challenge dominant narratives by highlighting individual perspectives. So disabled writers also confront the intersectionalities within disabled experience. For instance, Nujeen Mustafa, the girl from Aleppo, she tells the story of a young Syrian refugee with the cerebral palsy, intervening the theme of disability and displacements. It's more about intersectionalities. So this approach demonstrates that experience of disabilities are not monolithic, but are shaped by factors like race, gender, and class. So these voices enrich literature by challenging conventional representation and expanding the scope of what it means to live with disability. So this is what I have been reiterating since we have started this course, that it's high time now we should go into the experiences of people with disabilities. We should see intersectional identities, like here in Syrian refugees case, you see that displacement and disability is brought together. So lived experience of people with disability has potentiality to produce the counter narrative. That's the point I'm making here. Alright, let's look at the next slide then. As literature evolves, so do the forms through which disabled experiences are represented. Experimental and hybrid literary forms offer innovative ways to convey the sensory, emotional and cognitive experiences associated with disability. So we have a famous writer called, thinker I would say, famous feminist, Kristeva, who explores language and disability through fragmented narratives that reflect cognitive and communication differences. Similarly, we have memoir and poetry, which often use the fractured or unconventional structures to reflect the non-linear, unique experiences of those with mental or developmental disabilities. So these experimental approaches resist ableist expectations of coherent narratives, inviting readers into a diverse sensory world that often defies traditional literary structure. The shift in form reflects a commitment to portraying disability authentically, rather than shaping it to fit normative standards of storytelling. Two things here. So we are entering into disability and literature, right? When you are talking about cognitive impairments, or you're going to talk about cognitive disability in relation to a woman, obviously your narratives will not be coherent or linear. But ableist presumptions always want a narrative in a coherent way. You got the point? So this is ableist, that's why I'm saying ableism is not only about an attitude, it's about the form that is produced. Like let's say, for example, stream of consciousness is a result of 19th century's literature, because late 19th, 20th century, because a lot of things were going in the mind of an authors and also in the characters, and they've thought of representing the reality which is emotional, disturbed, depressed people they are experiencing in everyday life. What about them? It's not possible to talk about what they feel, what they think, what they talk, how they're experiencing in linear way, the way it was written before. So we have to challenge not only the genre, we have to also challenge the form of writing. We also have to challenge a method of writing, not only projection of the character. Because even if you talk about disability and if you do not change the genre and the method, it will again be ableist assumptions. As I said, that it doesn't mean that if you're talking about women, you're not talking about patriarchy. No, you can talk about patriarchy through women. But to challenge that method demands a new way to look at it. New method, new way of working. You are getting my point? So this is what I am asking you to examine. Like how you can talk about disability authentically without talking about the lives of people with disabilities and the way they feel and the way they think, the way they experience. So for that you have to change the entire method. Let's look at the next slide. Right? So the next slide I'm talking about, the representation of disability in literature has come a long way. From simplistic stereotypes and symbols to nuanced, authentic portrayals that challenge societal biases. The inclusion of disabled voices and perspectives not only enriches literature, but also fosters a broader understanding of disability as a facet of human diversity. By centering the experience of people with disabilities and exploring their intersectional realities, contemporary literature is building a more inclusive canon that respect individual agency and challenges readers to rethink their assumptions about disability. Right? Our job is not only to talk about the characters, right? Our job is to also to talk in such a way so that assumptions of the reader can also be challenged. Assumptions of the reader can also be challenged, because when you are writing, you have a set of audience in your mind, so make sure that the stereotypes in which they believe is challenged. You give a new, fresh perspective about people with disability, which was not the case before. Alright? So, that's a one. And second one is also talk about individual agency. Their freedom, their autonomy, their experiences, their challenges that they are facing about. Let's talk at least for humanity's sake, for providing inclusive space about people with disabilities, about their lives. Let's look at the last slide of this lecture now. So in a world, look at this here. In a world where literature continues to shape their social attitudes, the push for a better, more accurate representation of disability is both a literary and moral imperative. As more disabled writers share their stories, as non-disabled writers approach disability with sensitivity and understanding, literature can become a powerful tool for advocacy. It can be also a very powerful tool for empathy and social change. So, I am talking about using literature for social change. Literature has potentiality to do this. This evolution points towards a future in which disability is no longer seen as anomaly or metaphor for suffering, right? Is no longer seen as anomaly or metaphor for suffering, but as an integral part of human experience. Alright? So, this is the shift I am talking about. That is what I am talking about, that literature is capable of bringing the social change. Literature is also capable of solidifying the normative expectations, and literature is also capable of challenging and frustrating the normative expectations. So, it depends what are we choosing, right? It depends where we are moving, which side we are taking up, how we are looking at it. So, to conclude my lecture, I would like to say that we must rethink about writing literature, reading literature, so that we can build a beautiful society that is inclusive for everybody, marked with differences. That's only possible when literature is going to challenge the normative expectations and frustrate the prejudiced assumptions of the readers. With this, I would like to end my lecture here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much for listening to me. We'll talk about in the next lecture about Indian literature and disability. I'll pick up Indian writings, Indian works to see what author has to say about those forms, about the disability in Indian literature. Thank you so much. Next time we'll see you. Bye-bye.